The morning sun cast long shadows across Cedar Ridge as Sarah Mackenzie gathered wild sage along the creek bed, her calloused hands moving with practiced precision. The September air carried the scent of dying grass and the distant smoke from cooking fires, a reminder that winter would soon test the young settlement's resolve. At 19, Sarah had already seen more hardship than most women twice her age, but the knowledge passed down from her Irish grandmother kept her useful to the struggling community. "There she is," came a harsh whisper from behind her. "Gathering her devil's herbs again?" Sarah's spine stiffened, but she continued her work, placing the aromatic leaves carefully in her worn basket. Martha Blackwood, the Reverend's wife, stood with two other women from town, their faces pinched with suspicion and something darker, fear. "My little Thomas was burning with fever for 3 days," continued Mrs. Henderson, clutching her shawl tighter. "Near death he was. Then she comes with her strange teas and powders, muttering in that foreign tongue of hers, and by morning he's running about like nothing happened. It ain't natural." Sarah turned slowly, her green eyes meeting their accusing stares. Her red hair, inherited from her Celtic ancestors, caught the morning light like flame, another mark against her in their suspicious minds. "Mrs. Henderson, I was praying in Gaelic over your son, the same prayers my grandmother taught me, along with the healing knowledge that saved his life." "Prayers?" Martha Blackwood stepped forward, her thin lips twisted in disgust. "My husband says there's no prayer in the devil's tongue. Says you've brought a curse upon our town with your unnatural ways." The basket trembled slightly in Sarah's hands, but her voice remained steady. "Your husband's wife was near death from childbed fever, just last month. The willow bark tea I prepared brought down her temperature and saved her life. Would you call your own recovery a curse?" Martha's face flushed red, but before she could respond, young Billy Thompson came running toward them, his face streaked with tears. Miss Sarah, you have to come quick. My pa's been hurt bad by that bull. He's bleeding something fierce." Without hesitation, Sarah dropped her basket and ran toward the Thompson homestead, her practical boots kicking up dust. Behind her, she could hear Martha Blackwood's voice, shrill and condemning. "See how she runs toward trouble, like she knows it's coming." The Thompson farmyard was chaos. Robert Thompson lay unconscious near the corral, blood seeping from a deep gash in his thigh, where the bull's horn had caught him. His wife, Mary, knelt beside him, her apron already stained crimson as she tried desperately to stop the bleeding with inadequate cloth. "Stand back, Mary," Sarah commanded, dropping to her knees beside the injured man. She pressed her hands firmly against the wound, feeling the warm pulse of blood beneath her palms. "Billy, run to my cabin and bring my leather satchel, the brown one under my bed. Hurry!" As the boy raced away, Sarah examined the wound with clinical precision. The tear was deep, but had missed the major artery. Robert would live if she could stop the infection and blood loss. She had treated similar injuries in Ireland, when the English landlord's horses trampled farmers during evictions. "Will he be all right?" Mary whispered, her face pale with shock. "He'll live," Sarah said firmly. "But we need to work quickly." Billy returned with her supplies, and Sarah immediately began cleaning the wound with whiskey, then applying a poultice made from comfrey and yarrow, plants she had carefully cultivated behind her small cabin. As she worked, she hummed an old Irish healing song her grandmother had taught her, the melody helping her steady hands perform their precise work. A crowd had gathered to watch, their faces a mixture of amazement and unease, as Sarah's skilled ministrations gradually slowed the bleeding. She stitched the wound closed with careful precision, then wrapped it in clean linen she always carried in her satchel. "The fever will come tonight," she told Mary quietly. "Give him willow bark tea every few hours, and keep the wound clean and dry. He should be walking again within the week." As Sarah packed her supplies, she became aware of the whispers around her. The crowd was larger now, including Reverend Blackwood himself, his dark eyes fixed on her with unmistakable hostility. "Another miracle from our local witch," he said loudly, his voice carrying across the farmyard. "How convenient that she's always nearby when disaster strikes, almost as if she knows it's coming." Sarah stood slowly, meeting his gaze directly. "I was gathering herbs by the creek, Reverend, the same creek where half the town gets their water. There's nothing miraculous about being in the right place at the right time." "Nothing miraculous." The Reverend's voice rose. "You speak in tongues over the sick. Use plants that grow wild when our crops fail and appear wherever there's suffering. The Bible warns us about such signs." "The Bible also tells us to heal the sick and help our neighbors," Sarah replied, her Irish accent thickening with emotion. Everything I know came from my grandmother, who learned it from her grandmother before her. It's knowledge, not magic. But even as she spoke, Sarah could see the doubt and fear in the faces around her. These people had left everything behind for the promise of a new life in Texas, only to face drought, disease, and the constant threat of attack. They needed someone to blame for their hardships, and her foreign ways made her an easy target. As she walked back toward her cabin, Sarah could hear the Reverend's voice behind her, already beginning to turn the crowd against her. The seed of accusation had been planted, and in a community struggling to survive, fear grew faster than crops in the harsh Texas soil. Chapter 2. The Trial. 3 days later, the church bell rang with an urgency that brought every resident of Cedar Ridge from their homes. Sarah emerged from her cabin to find a crowd gathered in the town square, their faces grim with purpose. At the center stood Reverend Blackwood, his black coat and stern expression lending him the authority of judge and jury combined. "Sarah Mackenzie," his voice boomed across the square, "you stand accused of practicing witchcraft and bringing a curse upon our Christian community." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs, but she walked forward with her chin raised, her green eyes scanning the faces of people she had helped, people whose lives she had saved. Many wouldn't meet her gaze. "What evidence do you have of these accusations?" she asked, her voice carrying clearly despite the tremor she fought to control. Mrs. Henderson stepped forward, clutching a wilted corn stalk. "Our harvest has failed for the 2nd year running, right after you came to town. Before you arrived, we had good crops." "The drought affects the entire territory," Sarah replied. "Lack of rain kills crops, not healing herbs." "Then explain this," Martha Blackwood said, producing a small cloth pouch. "We found this buried near the well. Devil's bones and strange powders, just like the witches use in the old country." Sarah recognized the pouch immediately. It contained ground willow bark and dried chamomile, buried in the damp earth near the well to keep them fresh. "Those are medicinal herbs stored to prevent spoilage. Any healer would recognize them." "Healer?" Reverend Blackwood's voice dripped with contempt. "Or deceiver? Tell us, Miss Mackenzie, why do you speak in that foreign tongue when treating the sick? Why do your hands always know exactly where to touch? And why do you live alone, taking no husband, following none of our Christian customs?" The crowd pressed closer, their fear palpable. Sarah realized with growing horror that logic would not save her here. These people had already made their decision. This gathering was merely theater to justify what they had already chosen to do. "I speak Gaelic because it's the language of my childhood prayers," she said desperately. "I know anatomy because my grandmother taught me, and I remain unmarried because no man in this town has ever shown me anything but suspicion and fear." "Suspicion you've earned," called out John Martinez, the blacksmith. "My horse went lame the day after you treated my daughter's cough. That's no coincidence." "Your horse is 20 years old, John," Sarah shot back. "Age causes lameness, not healing a child's illness." But she could see her words falling on deaf ears. Fear had taken root too deeply, fed by hardship and desperation. They needed someone to blame for their struggles, and her foreign ways and solitary nature made her the perfect target. "The Bible is clear about such matters," Reverend Blackwood declared, opening the worn book he carried. "Exodus 22:18 states, 'Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live.' However, being Christian people, we will show mercy." His pause was calculated, letting the weight of the biblical reference settle on the crowd. "Sarah Mackenzie, you are hereby banished from Cedar Ridge. You have until sunset to gather your belongings and leave our community forever." "Banished?" Sarah's voice cracked. "Into the wilderness? That's a death sentence, and you know it." "Your fate is in God's hands now," the Reverend replied coldly. "Perhaps he will show you more mercy than you've shown our community." Mary Thompson pushed through the crowd, her face streaked with tears. "This is wrong. She saved my Robert's life. Without her, he'd be dead." "And maybe that would have been God's will," Martha Blackwood snapped. "Maybe interfering with the Lord's plan is exactly what brought this curse upon us." Other voices began to rise in agreement, the crowd feeding off their collective fear and righteousness. Sarah looked around desperately for any sign of support, but even those she had helped seemed cowed by the mob's fervor. "You have 3 hours," Reverend Blackwood announced. "Take only what you can carry and never return. Anyone who aids her after sunset will face the same judgment." The crowd began to disperse, leaving Sarah standing alone in the square. Her legs felt weak, and for a moment she thought she might collapse. Banishment meant almost certain death. The Texas wilderness was unforgiving, filled with dangerous animals, hostile weather, and the constant threat of Comanche raids. A woman alone had little chance of survival. Back in her small cabin, Sarah's hands shook as she packed her few possessions. Her grandmother's healing supplies went into her leather satchel, along with the small Bible her mother had given her before leaving Ireland. She rolled a blanket and her warmest clothes into a tight bundle, knowing that every ounce would matter in the days to come. As she prepared to leave the only home she had known in America, Sarah found herself thinking of her grandmother's words. "The gift of healing is both a blessing and a burden, child. There will be those who fear what they don't understand, but never let their fear stop you from doing what's right." The sun was setting as Sarah walked to the edge of town, her meager possessions on her back. A few residents watched from their windows, but no one came forward to offer help or even a kind word. At the town boundary, she turned for one last look at Cedar Ridge, the place that had promised new beginnings but delivered only judgment. "I forgive you," she whispered into the growing darkness, though the words tasted bitter on her tongue. Then she turned her face toward the unknown wilderness and began walking, each step taking her further from civilization and deeper into a landscape that cared nothing for the fears and superstitions of small-minded people. Behind her, the lights of Cedar Ridge flickered like dying stars, and ahead lay only darkness and the unknown dangers of the Texas frontier. Chapter 3. Into the Wilderness. The Texas plains stretched endlessly before Sarah, a sea of brown grass that whispered secrets in the wind. For 2 days she had walked westward, following game trails and creek beds, her water running dangerously low. The September sun beat down mercilessly during the day, while nights brought a cold that seeped through her thin blanket and into her bones. On the morning of the 3rd day, Sarah's legs finally gave out. She collapsed beside a small stream, her body racked with exhaustion and dehydration. The leather satchel that held her grandmother's medicines felt impossibly heavy now, though she refused to abandon it. These healing supplies were all that remained of her old life, her only connection to the woman who had taught her that knowledge was more valuable than gold. "Water first," she whispered to herself, crawling toward the creek on her hands and knees. The stream was barely a trickle, but she cupped the precious liquid in her palms and drank deeply, tasting mud and desperation. Her reflection in the shallow water showed a face already gaunt with hunger, green eyes hollow with fatigue. She had eaten nothing but wild berries and edible roots for 3 days, her knowledge of plants keeping her alive where others might have perished. But knowledge couldn't fill an empty stomach or provide shelter from the elements. As she sat by the creek, Sarah realized with growing clarity that she was probably going to die out here. The sound of approaching hooves made her blood freeze. Through the tall grass, she could see riders moving in her direction, 5 men on horseback, their faces hard and weathered. For a moment, hope flared in her chest. Perhaps they were travelers who might help her, or even settlers who would take pity on a woman alone. But as they drew closer, Sarah's hope turned to terror. These weren't settlers or helpful travelers. Their clothes were dirty and patched. Their eyes held the cruel gleam of men who lived outside the law. The leader, a bearded man with a jagged scar across his cheek, dismounted and approached her with a predatory smile. "Well, well," he drawled, his voice thick with menace. "What have we got here? A little lost lamb, all alone in the big, bad wilderness?" Sarah struggled to her feet, her hand instinctively moving to the small knife on her belt. "Please, I mean no harm. I'm just traveling through." "Traveling through?" The scarred man laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. "Lady, you're in the middle of nowhere. Ain't no roads here, ain't no towns for 50 miles in any direction. Either you're running from something, or you're lying about something." His companions had dismounted now, forming a loose circle around her. Sarah's mind raced, calculating distances and escape routes, but she knew she was too weak to outrun mounted men. Her only advantage was the knowledge in her head and the supplies in her satchel. "I was banished from Cedar Ridge," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm a healer. I have medicines that could be valuable to men who live rough lives." The leader's eyes narrowed with interest. "A healer, huh? What kind of medicines?" Sarah opened her satchel with trembling hands, showing them the carefully wrapped herbs and powders. Willow bark for pain and fever, comfrey for wounds, digitalis for heart problems. I can treat bullet wounds, knife cuts, infections. "Mighty convenient," one of the other men said, a thin fellow with missing teeth. We could use someone like that in our line of work. Now hold on, Pike, the leader said, his scarred face thoughtful. Could be she's more valuable than just her medicines. Look at that red hair, those eyes. Bet the Comancheros would pay good money for a woman like this down in Mexico. Sarah's blood turned to ice. The Comancheros were traders who dealt in stolen goods and human lives, selling captives to the highest bidder. Being sold into that life would be worse than death. Please, she whispered, backing toward the creek. I can be useful to you as a healer. I can keep your men healthy, treat their wound. You can do that as property just as well as free, the scarred man said, advancing on her. Maybe better, since you won't have any choice in the matter. Sarah's hand closed around a smooth stone by the creek bed. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it was all she had. As the leader reached for her, she threw it with all her strength, catching him in the forehead. He stumbled backward, blood streaming from the cut, cursing violently. Little wildcat's got claws, he snarled. Boys, take her alive, but feel free to rough her up some. Need to teach her some manners. Sarah ran, crashing through the tall grass with desperate energy born of pure terror. Behind her, she could hear the men mounting their horses, their laughter echoing across the plains like the howling of wolves. She knew she couldn't outrun them, but maybe she could find somewhere to hide, somewhere to make a final stand. The creek bed led toward a cluster of rocks and scrub brush. Sarah dove behind the largest boulder, her chest heaving as she tried to catch her breath. She could hear the horses getting closer, their riders calling out crude jokes about what they planned to do with their captive. As hoofbeats thundered past her hiding place, Sarah closed her eyes and whispered a prayer in Gaelic, the same words her grandmother had taught her years ago in Ireland. She thought of the woman who had given her the gift of healing, who had warned her that knowledge came with both power and danger. The horses had stopped. She could hear the men calling to each other, spreading out to search the area. It was only a matter of time before they found her. Sarah gripped her small knife, knowing it would do little good against 5 armed men, but determined to fight for her life until the very end. "Here, Kitty, Kitty," came a mocking voice from somewhere nearby. Come out, wherever you are." Sarah pressed herself against the rock, every muscle tense, waiting for the inevitable discovery. She had survived the accusations of witchcraft, the trial and 3 days in the wilderness, only to fall into the hands of men who would sell her like livestock. The injustice of it burned in her chest, but beneath the fear and anger, a small flame of defiance still flickered. She would not go quietly. Sky Do It You, Chapter 4, The Warrior's Choice. The war cry that split the morning air was unlike anything Sarah had ever heard, a sound that seemed to rise from the earth itself, wild and primal and filled with deadly purpose. The crude laughter of her pursuers cut off abruptly, replaced by shouts of alarm and the metallic ring of weapons being drawn. "Comanche!" one of the outlaws screamed, his voice cracking with terror. From her hiding place behind the boulder, Sarah heard the thunder of unshod hooves and the whistle of arrows cutting through air. The battle was swift and brutal. These weren't the disciplined soldiers she had heard about in Cedar Ridge, but seasoned warriors who moved like extensions of their horses, striking with lethal precision. The scarred leader's voice rose above the chaos. Fall back to the horses!" But it was too late. The Comanche warriors had surrounded them with the efficiency of wolves taking down prey. Sarah pressed herself deeper into the shadows, her heart hammering as the sounds of fighting grew closer. She had heard terrible stories about Comanche raids, tales of torture and captivity that made women pray for quick deaths. The battle ended as suddenly as it had begun. In the sudden silence, Sarah could hear the stamping of horses and the low voices of the warriors speaking in their native tongue. She remained frozen behind the rock, afraid to move, afraid to breathe, hoping against hope that they might pass by without discovering her. Footsteps approached her hiding place, soft, deliberate steps that spoke of a hunter who knew exactly where his prey was hiding. Sarah gripped her knife tighter, though she knew it would be useless against a Comanche warrior. The stories she had heard painted them as savage fighters who showed no mercy to their enemies. A shadow fell across her hiding place, and Sarah looked up to see a figure standing above her on the boulder. He was tall and lean, with the bronze skin and black hair of the Plains tribes, wearing buckskin leggings and a vest decorated with intricate beadwork. Most striking were his eyes, dark and intelligent, studying her with an intensity that seemed to see straight through to her soul. "Come out," he said in accented but clear English. "You are safe now." Sarah hesitated, her mind racing. Safe from Comanche warriors, but the alternative was to cower behind this rock until she died of thirst or starvation. Slowly, she emerged from her hiding place, her legs shaking with exhaustion and fear. The warrior studied her appearance, her torn dress, her tangled red hair, the leather satchel she clutched protectively against her chest. His gaze lingered on the small knife in her hand, and something that might have been approval flickered in his dark eyes. "You would fight?" he asked. "If I had to," Sarah replied, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "Good. A woman should have courage." He gestured toward the battlefield, where his companions were stripping weapons and supplies from the fallen outlaws. "Those men, they hunt you?" Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The warrior's English was better than she had expected, though he spoke with the careful precision of someone using a second language. Why? The simple question opened a floodgate of exhaustion and emotion. Sarah found herself telling this stranger about Cedar Ridge, about the accusations of witchcraft, about her banishment into the wilderness. She showed him the contents of her satchel, explaining what each herb and powder could do, how she had learned the healing arts from her grandmother in Ireland. The warrior listened without interruption, his dark eyes never leaving her face. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, seeming to weigh her words carefully. "I am called Takoda," he said finally. "It means friend to all in my language." "What are you called?" "Sarah Mackenzie." "Sarah." He pronounced it carefully, as if testing the foreign sounds. "Your people, they fear your medicine knowledge. They call it witchcraft. They believe I bring curses and bad luck." Takoda's expression darkened. "White man's foolishness. Among my people, one who can heal is honored, protected. Medicine knowledge is gift from the spirits." He called out something in Comanche to his companions, who had finished their grim work and were mounting their horses. One of them, an older warrior with gray streaking his braids, rode closer and spoke rapidly in their native tongue. Sarah couldn't understand the words, but she could hear the disagreement in their voices. The older warrior gestured toward her several times, his tone growing more heated. Takoda replied with quiet authority, but Sarah could sense the tension between them. Finally, the older man shook his head and rode back to the others, his disapproval clear. "He does not approve," Sarah said. "Blue Hawk thinks bringing a white woman to our camp will bring trouble," Takoda admitted. "He may be right, but leaving you here to die would be wrong. You have done nothing but help people, and they repay you with fear and hatred." He studied her face for another long moment, then seemed to come to a decision. "My horse can carry two. You will come with us." "To your camp?" Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. She had heard stories of white captives taken by Comanche bands, though she had never known if they were true or just frontier legends designed to frighten settlers. "Yes, our camp." Takoda extended his hand toward her. "You can tend our sick, share your medicine knowledge. In return, you will have food, shelter, protection. It is better than dying alone in the wilderness." Sarah stared at his outstretched hand, understanding that this moment would change everything. Behind her lay certain death in the wilderness, or worse fate at the hands of men like the outlaws. Ahead lay the unknown, a culture she didn't understand, people who might see her as an enemy, a way of life completely foreign to everything she had known. But in Takoda's eyes, she saw something she hadn't found in Cedar Ridge: respect. He looked at her, not as a threat or an oddity, but as a person with valuable knowledge and skills. For the first time since leaving Ireland, someone was offering her a place where her abilities would be valued rather than feared. Sarah reached out and took his hand. "I'll come with you." Takoda helped her up onto his horse, settling her behind him with practiced ease. As they rode away from the scene of battle, Sarah looked back once at the fallen outlaws, then turned her face toward the horizon. She was leaving the white world that had rejected her, riding into an uncertain future with people she had been taught to fear. But as the Comanche camp appeared in the distance, a cluster of hide teepees arranged in careful order beside a creek, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in months: hope. Maybe, in this place where healing knowledge was honored rather than feared, she could finally find somewhere to belong. Chapter 5. Two Worlds Colliding. 3 weeks had passed since Sarah's arrival at the Comanche camp, and she was beginning to understand the rhythm of life on the plains. Each morning brought new lessons in survival: how to preserve meat in the traditional way, which roots were safe to eat during the lean months, how to read the weather signs in the endless sky, Ayana, the chief's daughter who had first tended to her, had become both teacher and friend, patiently helping Sarah learn basic Comanche words and customs. "Your hands are strong," Ayana observed, as she watched Sarah grinding corn with smooth stones. "But you work like white woman still. Here, let your whole body help." She demonstrated the flowing motion that made the work easier, more efficient. Sarah tried to copy the technique, grateful for Ayana's patience. In the 3 weeks she'd been here, no one had called her a witch or looked at her with fear when she treated their ailments. When young Nalnish had fallen from his horse and broken his arm, the tribe had watched with interest and approval as Sarah set the bone and created a splint. Her success with their sick had earned grudging respect from even some of her harshest critics, but not from everyone. "The white woman brings danger," came a harsh voice from behind them. Sarah turned to see Blue Hawk approaching, his weathered face set in familiar lines of disapproval. "Already the soldiers come closer to our hunting grounds. They search for something." Ayana's jaw tightened. "The soldiers always search, Uncle. That is their way. It has nothing to do with Sarah." "Everything changed when she came?" Blue Hawk insisted, his dark eyes fixed on Sarah with undisguised hostility. "The spirits are restless. The buffalo herds move away from us. These are signs." Sarah set down her grinding stone carefully. Over the past weeks, she had learned that Blue Hawk was more than just a warrior. He was a medicine man, a keeper of traditions who saw her presence as a threat to the old ways. His opposition went deeper than simple mistrust of white settlers. "With respect, Blue Hawk," Sarah said in her careful Comanche, "the buffalo move because the grass is better to the north. And the spirits—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "The spirits gave me the gift of healing. Why would they be restless about me using it to help your people?" Blue Hawk's face darkened. "You speak our language with your mouth, but you do not understand our ways with your heart. Medicine power comes from vision quests, from years of learning the sacred songs, not from white woman's plants and foreign prayers." "Different paths to the same goal," came Dakota's voice. He emerged from behind the teepee where he had been working on new arrows, his presence immediately shifting the tension in the group. Sarah's knowledge saved Nalnish's arm. Her medicines helped Crowfeather's wife through the difficult birth. The results speak for themselves. "And what happens when the soldiers find us because of her?" Blue Hawk challenged. "What happens when her people come looking for their lost woman?" "No one is looking for me," Sarah said quietly. "My people cast me out. They believe I bring curses." Blue Hawk snorted. "Yet you expect us to believe you bring blessings?" The argument might have continued, but it was interrupted by the sound of running feet. Young Spotted Wolf raced into the camp, his face flushed with exertion and fear. "Riders coming," he gasped. "From the east, many of them. They carry the blue flag. Cavalry." Sarah's blood ran cold as the camp erupted into swift, organized activity. Warriors grabbed their weapons while women began gathering essential supplies, ready to flee if necessary. This was the life of the Plains tribes, always ready to move, always watching for the soldiers who wanted to drive them onto reservations. "How many?" Dakota demanded, already stringing his bow. 20, maybe more. They ride in formation, not hunting. Searching." Blue Hawk shot a meaningful look at Sarah. "You see, they come for her. Now we all pay the price for Dakota's soft heart." Chief Iron Bear emerged from his teepee, his presence commanding immediate respect. He was a man in his 50s, with the weathered face of someone who had seen too many battles, too many broken treaties. His eyes found Sarah immediately. "Is this true?" he asked in English, his accent heavier than Dakota's, but his meaning clear. "Do they search for you?" Sarah's mind raced. The cavalry could be searching for her. It wasn't impossible that Cedar Ridge had reported her as missing, or that someone had seen the outlaws' bodies and started an investigation. But more likely, this was just another patrol, part of the ongoing pressure to force all tribes onto government reservations. "I don't know," she said honestly. "It's possible, but they patrol these lands regularly, whether I'm here or not." Iron Bear studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Truth, but still dangerous for you to be seen. Blue Hawk, take her to the hidden canyon until the soldiers pass." "No," Dakota said firmly. "I will take her." Blue Hawk's eyes glittered with something that might have been satisfaction. "Yes, Dakota should go. He brought this trouble into our camp. Let him deal with it." The hidden canyon was a narrow cleft in the rocks about 2 miles from the main camp, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look for it. Dakota led Sarah there in tense silence, both of them listening for the sound of approaching hooves. Once they were concealed in the rocky shelter, he finally spoke. "Blue Hawk may be right," he said quietly. "Your presence here puts everyone in danger." Sarah felt something cold settle in her stomach. "Are you saying I should leave?" "I'm saying—" Dakota paused, seeming to struggle with the words. "I'm saying that choosing to protect you may cost me my place in the tribe." Blue Hawk has been whispering to the other warriors, saying I put a white woman before the good of our people. And is he right? Dakota met her eyes directly. Yes, he is right. The simple honesty of it took Sarah's breath away. In 3 weeks among the Comanche, she had found more acceptance and respect than in months at Cedar Ridge. Dakota had risked his standing in the tribe to protect her, and now that protection might cost him everything. "Then I should go," she said, though the words felt like swallowing broken glass. "I won't let you lose your family because of me." "Where would you go?" Dakota asked. "Back to your people who called you witch? Into the wilderness to die alone? To another white settlement where they will fear your knowledge just as much?" Sarah had no answer, because he was right. There was nowhere for her to go, no place in the white world where her abilities would be welcomed rather than feared. But staying here meant bringing danger to people who had shown her kindness. From their hiding place, they could hear the distant sound of horses and shouted orders. The cavalry patrol was searching the area systematically, checking every possible hiding place. Sarah pressed herself deeper into the shadows, her heart hammering as the sounds grew closer. Dakota notched an arrow to his bow, his face grim. "If they find us, stay behind me, no matter what happens." "Dakota," Sarah whispered, "why did you really save me? You could have left me to die with those outlaws. Your life would be simpler." He was quiet for so long that she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible above the wind. "My grandmother was a healer," he said. "She taught me that medicine knowledge is sacred, that those who can heal carry part of the Great Spirit's power. When I saw you with your plants and your gentle hands, when I heard how your people cast you out for helping them," he shook his head, "I could not let such a gift die in the wilderness because of fear and ignorance." The sound of horses was very close now. Through a crack in the rocks, Sarah could see blue uniforms moving through the camp, soldiers with their weapons drawn, ready for trouble. She held her breath as one of them rode past their hiding place, so close she could have reached out and touched his horse's flank. Minutes stretched like hours before the sounds finally began to fade. The patrol was moving on, satisfied that this was just another empty canyon in the vast expanse of Texas wilderness. But Sarah knew this was only the beginning. More patrols would come, more searches, more pressure on the tribe to give up their traditional life. As they emerged from hiding and began the journey back to camp, Sarah made a decision that felt like cutting out part of her own heart. She had found a place where her gifts were valued, people who treated her with respect and kindness. But that place came at too high a price, not just for her but for everyone she had come to care about. The time had come to make the hardest choice of her life.